Welcome to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club where we play games and brew good conversation together. My name is Jenny
And
Wyndham.
I'm Joel Thomas.
Welcome back, everyone. We are in week 2 of January, which means we are getting into the good stuff, is what I say, for the first game that we're playing, OneShot. That's the technical
The
term, the
thick
good
of the
stuff.
shot, perhaps.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. But for folks who are new to the club, welcome. And if you're a returning member, yeah, grab a cup. I have just milk glass of water because I'm supposed to stay hydrated. So there's that. But welcome. It's good to have y'all here. Joel, how are you feeling?
You know, right before we're starting recording, finished building the cabinets in my living room. So I'm feeling great. I had time to make some new tea. It is a pu'er tea that I got
Ooh,
while I was in Denver. It's called Winter Cabin with notes of oak and chocolate and mint. And it
that sounds
it
so nice.
smells like a leather library and tastes like Christmas is the best way I could describe it.
That's beautiful. I love that. I actually we did a big round of tea shopping because we were out because after the winter holidays and me getting like a sinus
Oh,
infection, there was just no more tea left. And so we haven't like cracked open the tea boxes yet, but there's this like lavender French breakfast tea that I'm so excited to try. So I'll report back on that later.
I'm out of my favorite tea. I'll have to get you. I'll buy two and I'll bring you one. That way you can
Ooh,
experience it as well. We don't know what it's actually called. We just call it the delicious tea. And
the delicious
it's
tea.
like,
I love
do you
it.
want a cup of delicious tea? Yes, I'll have a cup of delicious tea.
I mean, how could you say no?
It's
When
impossible.
you put it like that, yeah. Oh my gosh. Normally, I'm curious, like, what kind of tea do you like? Because I'm very much like a roasty, toasty, like toasted barley, toasted rice teas, toasted corn teas. That's my favorite kind.
I don't know if I've even had any of those teas. I feel like such a tea novice. In the same way that you were the expert at video games, you were also a far and away expert at teas compared to
What?
me.
No, oh my gosh. Any tea expert listening to this would just like shake their head fervently. Uh,
Mm.
but what kind do you like?
So this like pu'er, it's PU'ERH teas,
Mm-hmm.
are the like delicious tea that I've gotten into as a pu'er tea. This is a pu'er tea. That is like my current favorite thing right now. Like highly caffeinated
Ooh.
black tea. Um, and I've never been a milk and honey person, but I was like, I've
Mm-hmm.
been adding milk and honey to this, and it's like it simply is the best drink I've ever had. Like I don't
Simply
know.
the best. I
Simply
can't
the
sing.
best.
Thank you. I was like, I can't sing right now because my voice is like all over and my ears are plugged, and so I can't hear myself. So thank you for dropping that musical quote in.
Here's like my embarrassing tea moment. When I lived in Russia, I had a ton of tea. It was like several times a
Mm-hmm.
day. I brought a bunch of Russian tea home with me, and I remember talking to one of my friends when I got back home who like was raised in Russia, and she was like,
Mm-hmm.
"You brought Russian tea to America?" And I was like, yeah, and like for me as like a college kid, it was like this novelty.
Yeah.
And she was like, Russian tea, like unless you're getting like the highest quality stuff, is
Oh,
notoriously the cheapest tea in the world. And I was like, I don't know. It was just cool to have tea
yeah.
from another country, and I drank it.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, you tea novice. What are you
It's
thinking?
like when you're like, I like to watch anime, and someone's like, "Well, if you don't watch this obscure anime and subtitles
Right.
only," that's what happened to me in that tea conversation.
Just let Joel drink tea, everybody. Oh my gosh. I love that. I've never thought like is there like a special kind of Russian tea? Like is there I don't know, is there like a blend that they're famous for?
It's very personal there. Like I remember my program supervisor used to have us over to his house all the time, and he was like, "You get your tea from the store, and that's the tea that gets you by, and like most of the time you're doing. But when you host people, you hand assemble the tea that you are going to be making." And
Wow.
so like he's like, "This tea has 18 ingredients, and it's like my specialty that I make for people when they come over. And I always thought that was like such a cool thing. They have
Your specialty. Wah,
Yes, the
wah, wah.
specialty. And
Sorry.
they have like these if y'all are like online or have access to something to look it up, samovars are like the tool that they use to
Hmm.
actually like make their tea and steep it. And they are these really beautiful, large, like metallic contraptions. It's like a little really steampunky vibe. And it's just like it was like magic when I was there. It was like,
Wow.
oh, like I get to be a part of this thing. A person specially crafted this tea mix. I'm using the samovar that like they've passed down for like generations in their house. Like it was just such a cool,
Wow.
it was a really cool experience.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh. I sort of a different type of tea culture, but the sort of idea of like high tea
Mm,
is something that I had read about, known about, but had never participated in until just this past fall, where I got to go to this high tea, like afternoon tea thing. So much fun. I think tea and the culture of tea just everywhere is so interesting. We should go to like a high tea sometime. That would be so fun.
there's a Star Trek themed high tea
There
place in
is.
by my
Yeah.
house, and it is where I get my delicious tea from. I get
Oh
it to
my
go.
gosh. Wait, I didn't know it was so close to your house. Oh my gosh. I've been looking that place up and thinking we should
Oh,
go. Okay.
okay. Well, we're
Well,
gonna
there
make
we
it
go.
happen. All right, everyone.
Perfect. um, so now that we've got our plans out of the
Hmm.
way, we can actually get to some of our the pastry case, which is our grab bag of topics, including industry news as well as some just things that we've been up to personally. Uh, Admittedly, instead of talking about industry news this week, I thought it'd be fun to dive into something that you mentioned last week on the podcast that I realized we had talked about in the community hangout at the end of December. And like I know we've talked about just on an individual level, and I've talked about with people on an individual level, but like we've never talked about it on the show. And I thought it'd just be really cool to take a little time to delve into the
Hmm.
idea of game journaling.
Oh boy. Don't even get me started on
Oh
how
boy.
silly I am with this. My goodness, like this is one of those moments where I am like so on the periphery of an entire culture and a cultural movement, and it's like I have
Yeah.
but dipped a fraction of a toenail into that pond, and it's like the ripples are so far reaching, it's making waves around my life. So yeah, we got, I
Yeah.
mean, just so everyone understands, this is a podcast about video games. I realize we are talking
This
about
is.
tea and journaling right now.
But it all connects. It all connects. It really does. Um, so when we talk about game journaling, I guess a little bit of context. I love planners, journals, scrapbooking, something about the written word and putting it onto paper, putting memories and thoughts onto paper is really compelling to me. Um, I became a teacher partially because I loved the idea of discussing, reflecting on what we've read, writing it in a journal. Um, and yeah, I am just super passionate about the idea of using something tangible to take down your thoughts. And it could be a computer now, I guess, because technology's with us. But there's something lovely about a journal, to have that like physical receipt of just what you were thinking when you read a book or watched a movie or played a video game.
Mm.
Yeah. So for the past few years, what I've done in a very informal way is as I play games, I will take notes. I'm a note taker when I play. I don't know. Do you take notes when you play, Joel, at
I
all? You're a
haven't. I'm a
screenshotter.
screenshotter, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is its own like visual note taking in a way.
Yes.
I would consider it so.
Strong fodder for
And
conversation later, for sure.
exactly. Um, and what I've done is, in addition to taking notes, I've started also the habit of like going back and writing sometimes reviews, sometimes reflections, like less reviewing the game on its own merits and more reviewing what I've taken away from it and
Mm.
reflecting on what I've taken away from it. Um, in these journals. And so I thought last year, why not make it a little bit more formal and like instead of having it across like sort of random journals, as I take notes on everything else because I just have random notes journals in my life, why not put it in one journal and make it a little bit more
What
nice?
if?
What if? And so I did it last year and I had so much fun. I decided why not start the year with a fresh journal and make this a
Mm.
tradition. And so I did get a journal. For anyone watching on YouTube, I'm holding up my gaming journal this year. It is a Hobonichi, my favorite journal brand. Um, and I'm really excited to delve in and like have a place to record throughout the year what I'm playing and what I'm thinking about it. I'm curious, Joel, sort of what's your I'll pause just to like let you share a little bit of your journaling backstory.
Yeah, my background. When I was a senior in high school, I got very into journaling. And I was started like
Yeah.
I was like writing down quotes, and I would do creative writing prompts. And
Yeah.
then I went away to college and I never journaled again. And
Wow.
I so when I talk about being like on the periphery of the culture here, my partner
Mhm.
is so deep into journal world. Like she spends her weekends
Yes.
watching video after video on journals and stickers and stationery and parchment, and like is considering getting into the game herself as like a vlogger kind of thing, doing it. And so
Yes.
for years it's like I can talk to you about GSM paperweight. I can talk to you about binding types. I can talk to you about different sizes, not because I have any personal experience, but just because I am constantly surrounded by the pool that is the journaling culture. And basically, we went to Japan over this fall, and we knew that we were going to go to the Hobonichi store. Is also my partner's favorite journal brand. If you are not familiar with Hobonichi, the thing that like stands out to me is what is the Tomoe River paper, which is like this very
Yes.
thin. Think of like if you've experienced like an old school Bible without like
Like
crinkly, yeah,
dictionary.
dictionary paper, that super thin paper. That's kind of their steez. And so I was like in the store picking up some suvies, some souvenirs, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm just gonna get a journal for myself. I'm just gonna get one
Yeah.
for myself. So I
Yes.
also picked up a
Yes.
little Hobonichi journal. And while I was there, I got I knew that I was going to be using it specifically for Geeks and Grounds and for game journaling. And so I did get the Mother Franklin badge
So
Hobonichi
good.
cover. Uh, and because they had like a pairing for this recent release. And so I am trying to journal. And what I am realizing after one session of journaling is that what I'm remembering is that the reason I stopped journaling is because I cannot read my handwriting after I write things down. So my like I am an avid note taker at work, but it's all digital. It's like in my notepad app,
Mm,
etc. And it was a challenge from a stamina perspective. Like my hand felt like a claw. My writing is so bad. It's a reminder of how awful my spelling is when I don't have spell check. So it's like highlighting all these flaws, but it's like I kind of want
mm,
this physical artifact that I can come back to after time. And so for
yeah.
me, that's my big push. And especially with Geeks and Grounds, like having a place that I can keep track of the explicit things that are happening in the game. So I just don't forget. And then also like what are some of my more existential thoughts or philosophical thoughts about the game and the experience therein.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's really interesting, and I'm curious to know from you, is as you play, do you jot down notes as you play, or did you like do a recap after you were done? Like you played for a couple hours and you're like, okay, well, I'm done. Let me just like summarize really fast.
I did it as I went, because it
Mm,
was actually like really helpful. It's you mentioned the screenshotting thing. It is exactly what I'm doing when I'm screenshotting. I just did it like in handwriting. Like I was like, oh,
yeah.
that line is really interesting. And normally I have a screenshot, and I'll like look at my screenshots before we record and be like, oh, there's this thing that I want to talk about. And instead, I was like, I'm gonna write this down. And I
Yeah.
found like there were several like themes and connections that I was able to make for today's episode that like historically with just screenshots I would not have been able to. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really cool.
How about you? Are
I
you
mean,
a during writer, an after writer?
I'm a during writer. Because I feel like otherwise I just don't have the memory
Mhm.
to retain
Sure.
until after. Like, even if it's better than me, like, waiting a week to talk about it, it's still like, if I don't write it in the moment, I'm not gonna remember it, and I'm the same way where my notes are a mix of, like, facts that I wanna remember, like, specific occurrences that happen, so I'm, like, trying to keep in mind a timeline so that when we talk about it and when I'm trying to go back and remember, I know what events happened. I write down questions. So even things that maybe I'm like, maybe the question will be answered even by the end of this play session. If I'm thinking to myself a question, I try to write it down because it's potentially a nice question for us to talk about, or a question that, we could put in the discussion questions on
Mhm.
the playthrough guide. So things, and it's kind of nice to see, like, does the game have payoff where I'm, like, curious about something, and then eventually can I look back and say, "Oh, I actually by the end of the game I could answer all of this," or, "Oh, they
Ah.
didn't answer a lot of the questions I had at the beginning, and I forgot I had those questions until I looked back." Um, and then I also write quotes too. I think it's really fun to have these little, like, I think especially in a game like OneShot, there are a lot of one-liners that I think really stick with me, and so it's nice to have a little compendium of some of my favorite lines from the game. And I don't know. Again, for folks who are watching, like, I don't have a ton of writing, and I do bullet points. I actually don't write in paragraph form with a lot of this. I have on one side, like, the items of things that are happening, and on the other are my, like, questions and sort of, like, maybe reaction statements. And I don't do anything more long form until I finish the game, that where more existential philosophical stuff comes in.
For the listeners who are not watching the YouTube version of this, Jenny just lifted up and showed the inside of her notebook, and it was this
At a distance, so you can't
beautifully
read it.
true, couldn't read it, but it was just, like, clearly, even from a distance, well organized. I see some color
Mhm.
coding perhaps happening.
Yes.
Um, just for contrast, I'd like to show everyone my notebook. So the first page says 2024 game one shot. And then if you turn the page, it is I also only
I
do bullet
love
points. It's just
it.
a running list of things on the left page of what happened, and then a running list of things on the
Oh,
right page
that's
that
so
is
good.
my thoughts and curiosities. And like I'm just gonna take a screenshot and put this in the Discord of and be like, someone please translate this line and tell me what you think it says. Because like I before we hopped on today, I was like, that's not even those aren't even letters. They're not even pretending to be letters. What is happening here? So
Just scribbling on the page.
yes.
That's so cool. I love, like, one of my joys is seeing the way people take notes, because it's a really interesting insight into how they are thinking about
Mhm.
things. Um, and so I don't know, some people's notes are a bit more organized and color coded, and that's fine. But if your notes are not, and if you're like, I want to do a game journal and I want to join this, don't feel like you have to, like, just use a sticky pad if you want. Like, that's what I did for a long time, is my desk was littered with sticky pads of lines and, like, random things that I wanted to remember, and, like, random things that were, important that I probably forgot because it was on a sticky note and I never knew where a sticky note was after I wrote it. So don't feel like you have to do fancy things. Um, so that's why I like that you're showing yours too, because it's, yeah, like, I watch some videos online and I see people taking notes and I'm like, "Oh, their handwriting's so perfect," and they have these, like, special fancy, like, note stickers, and I'm like, "I don't wanna do that." And I don't, and I feel like for me, this is a middle ground of, like, I like to have the color coding. The color coding is actually game dependent because I have a couple games I'm playing, so I
Hmm.
do different colors to denote when, like, a different game's
Oh,
thoughts are
because
kind of
you're
coming
playing
up
more than one
for
game
the
at a
week.
time, and I'm very much a like
Yes.
mainliner one game at a time kind of dude. So that
Yeah,
okay,
and
that's
I'm like,
interesting.
I need to have 3 games running at once, and so it kind of makes for a little bit of chaos,
That's definitely more
within
of
the
a
color
challenge.
coding.
So I was actually thinking about like getting some tabs so that like, oh, this is the one shot
Yeah.
section and this is the whatever the next game is section. But n- if you're playing more than one game at a time, you would not be able to do that because you don't know how many pages you're going to take. Like, interesting. Okay, that's a really cool
No,
system, Jenny. I like that a lot.
but what I'm doing, and for anyone who wants to maybe mirror this, and you don't need a Hobonichi, you can just use a calendar. But I use like each day of the week is like a different game, or like whatever I played that day. I can like divide the score into two. And actually, in the sort of monthly calendar section, I'm going to eventually color code like the days that I played the game so I can see how long I played something,
That's so
and sort
cool.
of just those patterns. I find data like that kind of interesting personally. And
Yeah.
I know technically the like whatever the Spotify equivalent of Steam's
Wrapped.
yearly
Yeah.
wrapped um kind of does that for you, but it's really, again, it's nice to have it on paper. And um I think folks who read the newsletter saw this, but in case you are only a podcast listener or maybe you didn't catch the newsletter yet, there is a challenge that we're doing this year, the 2024 video game bingo. Cool name TBD, but it's video game bingo. And so I think I showed, this is what I showed last time, where if you would like to join, that's kind of like a fun activity you can do on top of maybe keeping track of what games you play. So there's like lots of things you can do when you journal and you game and you write it down. And I just wanted to dive into it because I think it's really cool. And I'm really passionate about people having these like handwritten physical things that you create.
Yes. So yeah, if you're in the Discord community, definitely like hop in. Tell us about if you do game journal. I'd love to like hear about your spread. How do you organize things? How do you think about the world?
Yeah.
I'll throw up my cryptic handwritten note that yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. What I was going to say for folks who also don't want to write, because I know sometimes I don't want to write, I have another example because I have multiple journals. Um, and so you can like do scrapbooking essentially.
Wow.
Whoops, I think I dropped something. So you can like scrapbook
That's
and
so cool.
like I take colors and then like either print, or if I have a sticker of the game from the game, I'll like just use that as sort of like the hub sticker. And then I write quotes around it. And that's like another way you can synthesize your information, again, in a tangible way that's not like as intimidating as maybe writing can feel sometimes. Because
Wow.
I know
Yeah.
writing sometimes can be like a whole page,
Yeah.
a pen. If you're left handed, it smudges. Like all these things can get in the way of writing.
Very cool.
Um, yeah, so the last thing I just want to really emphasize, like, you don't need a special anything. Just if you have a paper, a pen, if you want to even do it like online, like via Notion, or
Mhm.
just like any number of digital ways. We could set up threads if you wanted in the Discord, any number of things. You can journal how you want to. It's not meant to be like this is the way to do it and it's the only way, but I thought it'd be cool for us to share these are ways we're doing it. And if you find that compelling, we'd love for you to join us.
I love that. I when it comes to like practicing guitar, my philosophy has always been like you should use whatever you need to make sure you
Hmm.
practice. So if it's like,
Yep.
I just need a quiet space, you have that. If it's I need a specific guitar pedal or cable or whatever, do that. And so yeah, I
Hmm.
totally agree. It's like this should be something that should serve you. And so whatever it
Yeah.
takes to make it serve you and not be like an added weight, you should do that.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. I just know my brain is frazzled and I love having like it's so nice to read back on things. It's just so helps me organize my thoughts for sure. So yeah, I think that's it. Before we go on to the releases for this week, have you consumed anything else really interesting? I know you've been last week you talked about Spirited Away. Did you get to watch it?
I
The theater
did.
version?
Yes,
Yeah.
the stage performance version that hit HBO. I did watch it. I watched it over a couple of days because it is
Oh wow.
almost a one for one adaptation of the movie plus some
Oh.
songs and dance breaks. So I think it's longer than the movie. I think it's like 2.5 hours, something like that. So like
Oh wow,
it's a
yeah.
serious commitment. And what I would say is like a completely unique experience for a play and for me
Mm.
in that there is music, there's a score constantly playing behind it, so it's like you're hearing Joe Hisaishi's score from Spirited Away, through the dialogue. And like normally when you go to see a play, there is not an underpinning score. That's usually just like a musical thing, and even then only
Mhm.
usually during the songs. So um it's very strange. It's a strange experience for me, like watching a stage production where there's a score playing in the background, because it's like, how do they time this? How are they syncing up the dialogue with these heavy beat moments in the music? And like the composer must be incredible, or the yeah
Mm.
the composer must be incredible. It's a really fun and unique experience. Watching how they transform the magical elements into stagecraft is like,
Yeah.
wow, so cool. The acting very much resembles the acting experience of the anime. It's like that over the top, like
Oh,
you would
yes.
almost compare it to, like, if anyone has ever been to like a children's performance, so like a children's theater for a play, it's that type of energy. But for those of you who don't know, the content, the things that happen in Spirited Away are it's kind of heavy at many points.
Mhm.
And so it's a strange composition to have a live stage production with a score constantly playing, with like the over the top children's movie esque acting, with these very heavy topics, and it fits together really seamlessly. Like, I would love to hear other people's thoughts if they've had a chance to watch it, but like for me, I really enjoyed it. I don't know how it would be maybe a bit hard for me to stay focused out watching it on TV versus like if I was at a playhouse, it would have my
Mm.
rapt attention. But on TV, I needed to break it into two sessions. But I thought it was just like so creative, so well done, so imaginative. So yeah, definitely would recommend.
That's awesome. I have not had the chance to watch it, but it's on my to watch list for sure. I am so excited that it's on HBO.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. Would highly recommend. And then the other thing that I've been getting into is, I think I mentioned this, but for Christmas, my partner got me the collector's edition of the Akira box set of manga and
Mhm.
like peripheral items. And my God, like the one of the coolest, like, graphic novel-esque experiences I've ever had. And I'm a huge graphic novel person, so like that is
Yeah.
saying something. I am just like floored. The drawing, the writing, the storyline, it is incredible. So yeah, definitely enjoying it. If you want to borrow it after I'm done, you're definitely super welcome to it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I will have to because I have never read the manga of Akira. I've only seen the movie. So that sounds super cool. I guess have you I'm assuming you probably have watched the anime, like the movie.
Yeah.
How does it compare? Like, are there significant differences between the two? Are they like the Spirited Away
Mm.
stage play where it's a one-to-one retelling or frame by frame retelling?
What I would say is it is the anime is a very faithful adaptation, but it is an adaptation. It is,
Mm-hmm.
the storyline for Akira is layers and layers in the manga, that is like a much broader story than what you're seeing in the
Mm-hmm.
movie. Um, but the movie, in terms of like condensing all of that, and I have not read the whole thing yet, so it's hard for me to like do a direct comparison, but like I can tell you already that like there are so much more nuance to the manga, like the resistance movements trying to like fight back against this kind
Mm.
of like really oppressive militarized government. Like it's just it's a very it's a pretty intense manga, but it's very, very cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'll have to borrow that or maybe even pick up just my own set at some point cuz um yeah, I remember I think I watched the movie maybe a little bit too young
Oh
or at
wow.
least at the point in time I didn't quite get it, I feel like. And so in retrospect, I'm like, "Oh, I bet you there was so much there that I just didn't absorb because I was in like maybe early high school. Like I was in high
Mm,
school when I watched it and you think you're smart in high school. I was not. You might have been.
I was not.
I was nowhere yeah, knew nothing in high school, so, I think I want to try and revisit it.
It's interesting you mentioned this, because it's like, for me, I was one of those like really annoying anime kids through middle school. And
Mhm.
then moved schools and completely shut any public facing imagery of anime out of my life. Like, did not claim it. It was like, I want friends. I'm not going to talk about this.
Wow.
So I'd
Yeah.
like go home in the afternoons and watch uh, Dragon Ball Z or Sailor Moon or whatever. And
Mhm.
I really enjoyed anime, but I never talked about it. Then I went away to college and I didn't have any way to watch anime anymore. I didn't think it was cool to talk about. And then I
Yeah.
like, it's one of those things where like you find your people and it like
Mhm.
allows you to be yourself. And it was like, I found my people, and it was like midway through freshman year. They're like, you ever watched this show Naruto? And there's this fight with this guy Rock Lee and Gara. I think we should watch that. And like we watched just that fight like probably 15 times in a row. It was such a like,
Wow.
it's like one of those affirming things. And then I think it was like sophomore year, we had an RA who was like, "Oh, you guys are into anime. I have this like great like anime movie collection. Have you guys seen Akira?" And we were like, "No, what's that?" That wasn't on Toonami. And
Oh my
that
gosh.
became like kind of my entry point into like consuming anime. I would say like more critically,
Mm,
like finding things that are like maybe a little bit that are more than just like your week to week action anime, but are like more political in
right.
nature, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's so cool. I think my first like I quote unquote, yeah, like more grown up almost, or like more critically sort of more critical anime in terms of just the content and like having it be a bit more like philosophical was Ghost in the Shell. That was like my first like deeper
Hmm.
anime that I feel like I actually kind of got and like sort of comprehended in the way of like actually thinking about it versus being like anime Sailor Moon cool like cuz that was the extent of my anime
Sure.
appreciation. So like me watching Akira in high school when literally everything else I watched was Sailor Moon, like Miyazaki movies and Dragon Ball, like all of that equivalent. Magic Knight Rayearth. Like I loved magical girl things.
Yeah.
That's all. And so Akira was this like, what? What is this? And so I think it just kind of like went over my head. And also I wasn't as interested
Mm-hmm.
because there was no magical girls.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I feel like I want to revisit it now that I've matured a little bit in my tastes.
Yeah, I would recommend if you're looking for if you're ready for like a heavier experience. Absolutely, like it's
Hmm.
definitely one of those things that forces you into a more contemplative state, I would say.
Yeah. Dang.
Yeah. What have
Anything else
nothing
that you've
really. I
been
mean,
into?
certainly there's
Yeah.
more. What have you been getting into?
Um, so I mentioned this last week. I think a lot of these I mentioned last week, and I'm mostly just finishing them out. Finished Undertale, gave me the happy cries as always. I love that game so
Oh
much.
wait, have you played it
Um,
before? I'm so surprised. Oh, just kidding.
just a handful of times, no big deal. It's one of those games. I love it so much, and I had posted about it on like it wasn't even a main post. It was just like here's some like wintry games I love, and one person commented because I put Undertale in this list of games, and they were like, I love Undertale, and I was like, I love bonding with other people who love Undertale. It just makes me happy. Um, but like other people who don't, I don't know, it's like who are a fan like me where I will talk about it as much as someone will let me, but it's also not like my personality necessarily,
The girls who get
you
it.
know. Yeah, exactly. Um, I also have been reading, and I finished a book called The Mountain and the Sea. That's the one I talked about a couple weeks ago. That's a sci-fi
Hmm.
story, kind of a first contact ecological consciousness philosophical story about some scientists who essentially start to realize that there are this series not series species of octopus that has learned how to communicate and they believe has created like their own culture, so creating this sort of um, scenario of in our own world we are now contacting and reaching out to a species that we share the world with that we think has consciousness almost to our level.
Wow.
um, I think I really enjoyed it. I think there were times, and I mentioned this at first, where I was like, I think it tries to be a little bit deeper than really it needs to.
Mm.
Like, I think at some points I was like, okay, you're pushing this a little bit. Like, you don't have to go so contemplative. You can like let this be just let it be. But I thought it was a really enjoyable story, especially I think going into OneShot. It
Mm.
was a really interesting book to read because it talks about consciousness
Oh,
and
yeah.
what do we designate as like closer to humanity and what do we sort of acknowledge and give rights to. And I think that's a little bit of what One Shot touches on. So I think there's connections there, and it was a really good supplementary like text to have. And then I started this book called God Killer. And by started, literally, I'm on like 2 pages in. So I don't know if it's any good or not. But it was an impulse buy at Powell's when I went to pick up Christmas gifts for people. Um, and it's a fantasy novel, which I'm always a huge fan of. And basically, as a child, the protagonist saw her family murdered by this like fire god in the world, and so now she is making her living as a god killer in this world that she lives in. Um,
I love that premise. Oh my
I
God.
love a good like vengeance story. I think they're always super super interesting. Um and so I'm excited and I can't wait to see what it is. Again, I'm only just like barely scratching the
Mhm.
surface in it. I've barely cracked the book open essentially, but I think it's going to be a fun read. I hope it ends up being good because I'm really hope I need a fantasy novel. I need a good fantasy to dive into in 2024.
So for the mountains and the sea, as you were
Mhm.
kind of like reading through, I'm curious to know about, maybe the way to frame it is like, how optimistic is the book about humans and like our ability to adapt and deal with this type of situation? Is it kind of like a gritty, like, oh boy, we would not handle this well? Or is it more like, like there could be like different factions, but on the whole, like we're humanity and we want to be
Yeah.
seen, or we want to feel like we're the good guys. Like,
I think I think there are notes of optimism. I think overall though it does spend more time illuminating how humans aren't the
mm,
greatest and the ways that especially capitalism and the ways that in this imagined world capitalism and robots and AI essentially have combined to create really harmful, well, they're harmful now, but ever more harmful structures of like labor for people.
mm,
Um, and so I think you see a lot more of like the stuff that continues to go wrong. It's definitely more dystopic, but there are notes of hope throughout. So it's not totally depressing to read. Um, but yeah, it's sci-fi, like traditional sci-fi in the sort of dystopic sense.
gotcha. Like trying to
Yeah.
talk about something that's real today, perhaps through a more sci-fi
Yes.
lens.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really stuck with me and was really interesting was how very quickly in the novel, this is quite early, you learn that like sort of the Alaskan northern fishing boats still exist. But instead of providing robots to do that work, because robots are damaged by the salt and sort of the
Mm,
corrosive elements out at sea, that's labor that is still outsourced to humans. Um, Basically in sort of this like they're kidnapped, put into what is it called? Basically like forced labor
oh,
on these ships, these Alaskan
interesting.
fishing. They don't specify Alaska, but they're these northern fishing ships. But what's interesting is that they still have AI running the ship, and so it's not even necessarily humans who have the final say. But yeah, the fishing, basically the fact that even in these situations where we have like really intelligent and or at least like useful AI and robots, they were used to manage the humans rather than do that labor themselves. I thought was that was something that really stuck with me, especially in light of the conversations that we're having around the use of AI and robots right now, just in our world.
There is, I've been seeing this clip go around TikTok a lot lately. It's a clip from the show The Orville, which is like
Hmm.
the creator of Family Guy made like a Star Trek like show that starts off like really sardonic and then eventually becomes very much like a legit show, apparently. But it's from a recent episode where um, a woman from 21st century US is brought on board this future starship thing, and she's like, "Oh, like you guys have this synthesizer that can create literally anything: food, medicine, uh, supplies, materials. So, of course, you don't have any strife on your worlds. If you let me take one of these synthesizers back to my time, we could have we could have peace and we could do it." And the person talks about how it's like it's the opposite.
Mm,
Through the collaboration and cooperation of the entire world that we were able to create the synthesizer and share it with all people. Because if we had had the synthesizer before we had the cooperation and collaboration, it would have been used to further the
mm-hmm.
injustices and divide society. And I was like, wow, that is a poignant idea, and it like really stuck with me. I might have some of the details on this a little off, but
Yeah.
like
What was it?
that is,
Orville, you said this was called?
yeah, the
Okay.
Orville.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. That sounds fascinating. Um, Especially again, you said the guy who made Family Guy?
Yeah, Seth whatever.
What? Okay. I'm not normally
MacFarlane,
a
yeah.
fan of his work. I just the animation style and the humor never really hits for me. So this is interesting. I'm curious because this is not something a person I would normally be curious about in terms of creative
Oh, I
process.
totally agree. And like
Uh,
the first season I tried to watch, and it's like nigh unwatchable for me. It's like very much that like time capsule Family Guy where it's like,
mm,
I understand why I laughed at this when I was in sixth grade, but like I can't do it now. And like across the board, the perspective is that like after like season two, it's like the writing of the show flips, and it very much is like Star Trek: The Next Generation, like that level of like
wow.
philosophical writing within this show. And there's still like some humor or whatever, but it's not like, it doesn't feel like a spoof of Star Trek anymore. It feels like its
Mm,
own sci-fi thing. So yeah, like hats
incredible.
off to them. Like it was a beautifully written scene, even if I'm getting some of the details wrong.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. Good recommendation. I'll have to check that out too. Is that
Hmm.
on like Hulu,
It was on Hulu
Netflix?
last time
Okay.
I checked,
Okay.
but I'm not sure.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll Google. I'll do a Google search.
Yeah.
Just to close out the pastry case for this week, some notable game releases. There are two this week that I thought would be really great to highlight. The first is Turnip Boy Robs a Bank. Um, this one is by Snoozy Kazoo. And if you've played the first game, which was, I think, let me see if I'm remembering it. Turnip Boy commits tax evasion. You are in for another treat of just turnip hijinks and crime. This time, I love that Turnip Boy decides it's time to rob a bank. Um, fight the fuzz, as they say in their Steam
That's right.
description, and yeah, do more crime. So this one's cool. It's more of a roguelite. So you're doing a lot more dungeon crawling and then like going back to the start if you get caught and
Mm,
upgrading and then going out on another run again. So it's different than the first one, which I think is really cool. I love it when studios take like the same IP and maybe refresh it and like do a different genre or different take on it.
mm.
And yeah, so that's Turnip Boy. The next launch that I think would be really interesting is called The Cub. This is by
Ooh.
Demagogue Studio, and these are the folks who did Golf Club Nostalgia, which I think was previously called Golf Club Wasteland. And High Water, which is currently only out on Netflix. So that's kind of an interesting exclusive title currently. Um,
Hmm.
this team, what they do in the most outstanding way is world building and lore. In Golf
Wow.
Club Nostalgia, you're playing golf across the remains of a just decrepit and discarded Earth, essentially. Like we have left Earth and people come back and do tourism on this like abandoned planet. And the lore is given to you through radio. So you're like listening to the Earth radio as you play golf. And it's so fascinating. High Water is a game set in the same universe. And I think the Cub is also set in the same universe. And instead of
Hmm.
being a golf game, the Cub is a more platforming, sort of parkour style title based on the Jungle Book. And basically, yeah, it's like inspired by,
Oh.
yeah, like the 90s classic Sega games too. So, like, challenging. I'm assuming it's going to be challenging. But it's another game about sort of the remains of humanity, the struggles of this one particular character, and also the probably the corrupt rich and corporations and what remains of them in this post-apocalyptic world. It
You
looks
know what it
really
looks
good.
like? It looks like the old Aladdin game from back in the
Yes.
day.
Yeah, or like The
Um,
Lion King.
yes, yeah, exactly. Oh, funny.
Yeah, so definitely like old school platforming mechanics, but very sort of, I think, modern tale. So very cool. The Cub. Um, two games coming out
Perfect.
this week if you're interested in picking up something new.
And speaking of Russia, in the imageries, you can see like people. You see this little kid running around,
Yeah.
and in the background of one of the shots, you see the word progress, but written in Russian characters, Cyrillic. But it's phonetically saying progress. It's not the Russian word for progress. It is.
Interesting.
It is just progress. Interesting.
Yeah. I wonder, as a side note, because I know in Korean, what's really interesting with the language is now instead of taking in like words and using the Korean word, the original Korean word for it, now it's more popular to use the American word, but phonetically spelt Korean in Korean. So
Interesting.
I'm curious if that's like
Yeah.
like kind of a reflection on that, or like sort of the globalized language before everything fell. I don't know. Cool.
Very cool.
Again, as always, any questions, comments, feedback on anything we've discussed here in the pastry case, just send an email to jenny@geeksandgrounds.com or leave a voicemail at sayhi.chat/geeksandgrounds. So you can always leave a comment. Are you ready to
Yes.
talk about the main brew, this month's
If
brew?
if when we talk about the main brew, we can talk about my new favorite character in all of video
Oh,
games,
wow.
then yes.
Okay, so let's lead with that. I would
Okay.
love to know, who is your favorite character and like how did you come across them?
My favorite character sends you on a bit of a roundup quest. If you could think of like the old Zelda games, like get all my chickens or my cuckoos so I can have them in
Mhm.
my. It's kind of one of those moments. The person does give you a reward for helping him. The person is a bit of a loner and is a little bit into one specific animal. We're of course talking about the ram herder.
The famous ram herder in OneShot. Who could forget?
Oh God, I can't wait to talk about this. The Glen and the Refuge and like digging in here. But what I'm most concerned about is that we get to talk about the ram herder today.
Yes, absolutely. We will for sure talk about the ram herder. Again, for anyone who is fresh to the podcast, as a quick reminder, every week we delve into a section of the game. We play it together as a community. And so this is our chance to talk about the section that we played over the last week. So if you haven't been playing One Shot and you would like to save this for when you are done playing this section of the Glen and the Refuge, please feel free. But as we talked about, if you want to listen, use this to prime your playthrough, perhaps, or even if you're not playing through, but you just like to listen about the game and learn about the journey through the audio format. This is what we'll be talking about. So let's start, because when we ended in the last episode, we didn't actually get out of the Barrens quite yet. We like took a nap
Hmm.
and we woke up and we were making our way to a rowboat. I realized we didn't talk about one very important and specific thing. Um, or no, we did. Never mind. But what happened when you woke up? I guess that's one thing that I wanted to ask
Ah,
about. Yeah.
yes, because I hadn't played it yet.
Yes. Yes.
So when you wake up, you assuming you fell asleep, because I don't think you're forced to, but assuming you fell asleep, you are rewarded with a little mini cutscene
Yeah.
of Nico's dream. And there's kind of this open field with wheat and the sun is shining. And when Nico wakes up, they immediately start talking to you
Mm-hmm.
and are like, "Do you know? Like, do you know what that was? Like, that was my home. That's where I'm from." And so it's interesting because like it's fascinating to me that like there's a way you could play this game and not experience that.
Yes. Um, put a like feather in your cap to remember this and like the act of sleeping. I don't want to talk about it yet, but when we get maybe closer to the end, I want to talk about what happens when you don't sleep in this game, or when you maybe opt to do something different instead of like
Oh,
sleep and close. Um, but yeah,
okay.
I think this dream is really lovely. And I think this further reemphasizes the point of Nico being a kid. I think when you wake up and you hear Nico saying, like, oh, this is my home. I miss my family. Like, I'm so excited. Do you have a son too? Do you have fields too? Um, it further reinforces you at least for me, it further reinforced for me the feeling of nurturing this child and being like,
Mm.
I really want to protect you. Oh my gosh.
Yes, I took some notes in my game journal about
Ah.
that because the idea that he's talks about, and this it happens a few times throughout this play section where he's like,
Mhm.
I really miss I really miss home. I
Yeah.
really miss my mom. I really miss her pancakes or whatever. And it's just like it forces you as a player to humanize and not see Nico as like just a tool that is the Messiah, which is another thing I definitely want to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I agree. Like I'm so curious, like what the gaming experience would be like if you don't sleep and don't get that personal
Mhm.
exposure, I suppose.
Yeah. And so as we, if whether you sleep or not, it's time to get on the rowboat. The literal like robot is going to be taking you across the ocean, and you're rewarded with this really beautiful pixel art cutscene again,
Hmm.
where which also very interesting. I just realized the dreams are not pixel art. They're
Art,
like
art,
art. Like they're like
2D art.
digital almost watercolory type
Yeah.
art. Whereas like these
Mm.
cutscenes in the game are pixel art, and I think that's notable. I think, and I yeah, just notable.
I think there's so much meta stuff happening in this game. It's hard to know like when the right time to talk about it is, to be honest. Like I had a realization on a similar vein as as I woke up last night as I was
Yeah,
playing um that you're playing this game on like a computer operating system,
right.
but there are computers in this world.
Yes.
So the people in this world know what computers are,
Mm-hmm.
which means they know what the user of a computer is,
Oh my gosh.
and yet they still call you a god in this game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, but hold on, we're just playing this on a computer, just like you play things on a computer. So it's like this weird like transference almost like
Yeah.
I really want to talk about kind of the metaphysical, messianic, and theological elements of this game because it's like but not really. It's hard to know what it's really getting at until the end because it's like why are they choosing to use the word Messiah? Why are they choosing to use the word God here? Like it is fascinating to me that they're choosing the people of that world
Yeah.
are choosing that language.
I'm I'm really curious if you have any thoughts you can share on that, because like you have a much more grounded experience in the use of like words like Messiah and like sort of the relationship to sort of this like biblical undertone almost in sort of the prophecy. I'm curious if you have anything that you are hypothesizing right now, or even if you're just tossing it around loosely.
Yes. So, a Messiah, like the literal word Messiah means anointed one. Like one who
Hmm.
has been anointed is a person who has been set aside for a distinct purpose. That is
Hmm.
literally like what it means. And so when we talk about like being tamed and having purpose and like all of that seems to like come
Yeah.
into play here. Um, it is a hyper religious word. Like we use the word in common parlance, like "Oh, you're my savior," like "Oh, my Messiah," but we only use it in common parlance to reference a major theological movement within the world, right? Like it doesn't
Right.
exist as a word on its own. It only exists in a word as a word within that context. And so the lexicon of this is like it's fascinating to me that the game developers chose to use this word that is so
Mm.
heavy. It has so much weight behind it. And what struck me, and this is just like, I don't have any theories yet about why they've chosen to do that because it was really just last night that the irony of it hit me of like,
Hmm.
these people who know what a god or that know what a computer user is are calling you a god as a person who's using a computer, and that is just like at a minimum. I was like thinking about all the characters who have referred to you as a god. Maybe let's put my tinfoil hat on for a second.
Yes.
It is possible that 99.9% of the characters that we are meeting throughout this world don't know that they are in a game, that they are in a simulation.
Hmm.
But at a minimum, whoever is talking to you, the player, through the computers, the one who like gives you codes and hints or whatever to help you along the way,
Hmm.
that person does know you're using a computer because they tell you how to
Yes.
interact with your computer. So like it is just it's really tripping me up a little bit. I'm loving this game. I love this type of stuff. It's really forcing me to think. So yeah, that's what I got so far.
Yeah. Well, because okay, here's what we do know, right? Because we know that at least from the vast majority of characters in this game that we have interacted with, a lot of them are robots. A lot of them are programmed. And I
Hmm.
think that is really interesting when you were thinking about we have robots that are programmed, characters who are in a game that we know are programmed, but do they know they're programmed? And then we have Nico, who's 1 degree separated from this world. Does Nico is Nico part of this programming? Is Nico actually separate? What's going on there? And then we have us. So there's like layer upon layer of what are we dealing with in terms of reality versus not reality, programming versus not programming, that I find really fascinating. And I love what you just brought up about so just knowing sort of the background of what Messiah means specifically, because I did not know that emphasis on like anointed with a purpose. I think that's really interesting, especially considering Nico's role. Um,
Hmm.
and I had thought about that word in particular, um and it did strike me because I was like very easily the developers could have said you are the hero, you are the
Yes.
chosen one, you are the
Yes.
like yeah, any number of words, and Messiah is huge. Like that seems very significant.
It was when I realized the like irony of that yesterday. It was when I
Hmm.
realized the it all comes back to reboot, baby.
Oh my gosh, every single time, first reboot reference of the year.
Cheers out, cheers everyone out there. Because like what you just said, like is Nico a program that has a function, has a purpose, has a program, is a fascinating idea because that is literally the premise of reboot, that like the Guardian is an antivirus software that is Bob, right? So it's just like it's I had not thought about it like that until you mentioned that, and I was like, Oh, you done did something, Jenny. You done did
Maybe.
something
And
there.
I could be wrong. We're still hypothesizing at this point, but it's like the possibilities, the way that this game introduces the possibilities of what could be, I think is also really fascinating. Um, and regardless of whether or not in the lore of the game Nico is part of the programming or not, there's that extra, again, the meta level of like, for us, Nico is programming, like
Hmm.
technically. And so I think it just adds a layer on like us connecting with this character, feeling like this character is perhaps more real in a weird way than some of the others. There's this like level of how are we connecting with Nico comparing how we connect to the world? Because if we feel like Nico is more real than the rest of the world, that's going to affect like you know what I mean? Like I think there's this the
Yes.
relationship that you start to develop when you think Nico is not programming and everything else is. Um and it's really
Oh,
interesting because having just played like Undertale, for example, where I feel like as a player of Undertale, I very much feel like the world is real,
mm,
including the characters. And when I play OneShot, I feel like there is a little bit more of that dissonance of like, I care about the characters in the world of OneShot, but like Nico holds a special significance to me because I feel like Nico needs to get home because Nico's not part of this world. And
yeah.
there's this interesting like almost dissonance, not quite, but there's this like awareness that I don't think I have when I play other games.
Oh God. Okay, let's you it struck me again when you talk about like it's not their world. This is okay. So right now, as far as like where we are within the game structure,
Mhm.
uh Nico has agreed to take on this task. They're
Yep.
trying to take this light to the top of the tower, and it might not help. It might not save the world, but
Right.
it might be good anyway. Um and they've been very accommodating. Nico has been very much like, yeah, like I'm going to do this. Like I'm trying to get home. It's kind of my only lead. I'm going to do this.
Mhm.
And as you get deeper in the sadness about what he's missing becomes more and more potent. I am wondering if we're going to get a moment. This is like, here's my hypothesis. I'm wondering if we're going to get a moment where Nico's like, I don't want to do this. Don't make me
Yeah.
do this,
Ooh.
which is literally what happens like in Christianity with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's like, I don't want to be the sacrifice for all humanity.
Mm.
God, don't make me do this. And when you think about
Mhm.
like from a Trinitarian perspective, I'm sorry for all the weird language here, but like Jesus coming from whatever realm the gods live in into the physical world that we live in is very much and like a parallel of Nico coming from this other space into a world
Whoa.
that feels perhaps less real than the world of the gods. And maybe we're going to get to a point where Nico is like, please don't let me do this, which is like another very direct parallel to this like Jesus story. Like, oh boy.
Whoa, that's interesting. See, this is why, because I have none of that lore, like none of the Bible lore is in
Yeah.
my body or head. So it's
Lucky
like
dog.
really fascinating to hear that because that's kind of wild to like see those sort of direct parallels. Um, yeah, wow.
So, but let's get into more of the, like the practicality of like what actually
Right.
happened in these sections, right? So
Yes.
you go from the outer barrens into the first inner ring of this world because you're kind of moving towards a center of a
Mm-hmm.
circle, and the next ring is called the Glen. And the Glen is kind of the first time that you see signs of life. Like there are buildings, there are plants, there's plant matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you stumble across an older brother, Calamus, who's looking for his younger sister, Alula. You make your way through like a kind of a maze-like building to find her and free her. Um, it is it was odd for me, honestly, like as a first time player of this game, because it's like I was set up in that first section to be like, well, the whole world is going to feel like this. It's going to feel empty.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I played in the Glen and especially in the Refuge, it's like, no, like this is a bustling place. Like you could spend hours, I'm sure, going up and talking to every like living creature in this game. And it's like, I didn't do that because I'm kind of speed running it for the sake of the podcast. But like, it was a jarring experience for me to go
Mm.
from the Barrens where it's like there's nobody but robots to the Glen where it's like within a few minutes of getting into this area you've met a live person and they've got a task for you, they've got a quest for you.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's really interesting is it's one thing to hear about a world that's basically over. You know, you hear from
Mm-hmm.
Silver, who's this
Mm-hmm.
robot, and they're just like, yeah, you know, you can try, but you know, things are basically done. So I don't know, do what you will. And then once you get to and see that there are still people living in this world and trying to like fish. There are people trying to fish and still trade. And they
Yeah.
talk about how the islands are coming apart, but the plant goddess Maze is like keeping it together for them. You start to, that is when you do start to become connected to the world, I think, in a way that the Barrens do not allow you to. In the Barrens, you're just kind of like, I'm here for Nico. Once you start to get to know these siblings that you're helping out, Magpie the trader, the infamous ram herder, who we'll
Oh,
talk about in a second, um, you start to get glimpses of the world and realize what is at stake. Where before, I think I could have been like, well, it's all barren anyway, so maybe we do save only Nico, and we only,
that's a
you know,
really good
we choose
point.
to for Nico to uh, not give the sun up, which we actually don't even know. We don't ever get confirmation. I feel like we get this like, hey, Nico needs to like deliver the sun to save the world, but we don't ever get confirmation about what happens to Nico. We just
Mm-mm.
assume Nico's going to go home, right?
It's an assumption,
Yeah,
there
it's
is
just an
no
assumption.
guarantee.
We don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting. And because like for me, like the brother and sister, like it was like it felt cool to like connect with them and like we went back to their house and like had a whole little moment
Yeah.
together. But it was the character Maze, who's like a dying forest spirit that was
Yeah.
for me the first character that I felt very like attached to, where I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this person's like passing away and I want to give them some moments of comfort.
Yeah.
As you continue throughout this section that we're playing, the Glen and the Refuge, you actually have an opportunity to try and like resurrect her. And
Well, no, I don't think you resurrect her. I think you just don't, you just give her the light bulb, the sun, for a little bit of comfort, I think.
so in the Refuge,
Oh,
you
yes,
find
yes,
the
yes.
Colonel,
You're
right?
moving ahead. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
wasn't there
Throughout
yet.
both sections. Sorry.
Yes.
Throughout both sections. So like by the end of the Refuge, you have an opportunity to like plant a seed that they
Yes.
imply may bring her back.
Yes.
And so it was like I am not usually it doesn't I don't know if it will do anything with the store for the story. I know you get like an achievement for it, but I
Mhm.
am not an achievement person. I was just like so invested in helping her.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. Like I think Jenny, is this game going to force me to choose between helping Nico and helping this world?
I don't know. I'm
Oh,
just saying there's a lot here to dig into.
oh no.
So we help Maze, I guess, in kind of going back to that like sort of what is happening concretely, I guess,
Mm,
before we get into the more philosophical stuff again. um you're helping out the kids, you're helping out Maze and providing that last bit of comfort. I want to give you the opportunity, because once you give the Maze the sunshine just for that last little bit of respite, before basically they pass away,
mhm.
um, you have your hands free. And so you have the opportunity to go and explore the village a little bit. And who do you find? But,
The motherfucking ram
oh my gosh.
herder. This dude, it's like, do you remember when you first saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail and you see Tim the Enchanter who like is dressed with ram horns and he's like a sorcerer or something like
Yes.
that and he gets attacked by the bunny. Um that the ram herder is like someone plucked this character out of Monty Python, put him in one shot
Oh my
with
gosh.
all of his quirks, all of his like randomness,
Hmm.
and he's just like this. I don't know. I don't know how to describe him outside of like the town weirdo or something. Like he's
Yeah.
on the outskirts. He's got these rams. One of the rams, at least in my game, I don't know if this is a glitch, is just constantly spinning in
Yes. No, that
circles.
is intentional. It's so good.
There's another ram that is labeled Ba, like it
Yeah.
has like the letters BAA on its skin. Like it's just such a moment of like randomness and joy. And there's like a
Yeah.
little puzzle where you want to try and like push the ram into the dark colored grass, which
Yeah.
I always love puzzles like that. It's like one of those little push puzzles. It's also like if you haven't played this game yet, if you have played the old school Pokemon games where
Hmm.
you're in the caves and you have to like push boulders around to like make your way out and like change the flow of the water. It's like that, which
Yeah.
is always one of my favorite mini games, just period. So it just scratches so many itches. You get a cool Ram T-shirt if you like follow through their quest, like, and then you get to go into a secret club with a Rams logo on it if you have the T-shirt. It's just like it doesn't add anything to the story, but it's just this little moment of randomness that I totally appreciated.
Hmm. It's so good, especially because I think at this point of the game, things are getting really heavy. You
Hmm.
just had this really weighty exchange with Maze. You know that like she's going to be gone soon. You have seen glitches, which we have not
Oh,
talked
right.
about, all around, starting in the Barrens, but now much more prevalent in the Glen. Where these like pixelated squares are impeding your progress, and if you touch them or if anyone gets trapped in them, they are somehow they're lost, they're damaged, something bad happens to them. We don't know. So all of this dark stuff is happening. So having the ram herder and the ram club come through and just make for a little bit of levity is so good and so smart and wonderful. And it is one of my favorite moments in the game.
You know, I just realized what they really need. They don't need Nico. Who they need is Bong from Queer Man Staring into the Rock Pool to
Yes.
come in and depixelate the pixelated
Oh my
places.
gosh, that's
That's what we really
perfect.
need.
Good crossover. For folks who did not play it with us, Queer Man Peering into a Rock Pool.jpg. Um, Highly recommend it. We played it last year.
Very
It was
fun game.
very, very good.
Oh
Um,
man.
so yeah, I'm thinking we are going through, we're helping out folks in the village. Um, we have a couple of glitch instances, and we have one more conversation with this like computer entity that we don't
Hmm.
really know who this is, but we're able to talk to this computer, and that's actually how we find one of the siblings, is because they're just like I forget, they give us a clue, and it basically
Right.
tells you to like look at your desktop or like look at this one folder, and it has an image and you can figure out the puzzle. So
Right.
we are constantly reminded that even though we're in this world, we're doing things, there is some thing or someone who is able to monitor all of our actions, all of Nico's actions, and they're offering assistance to us, but we don't know who they are or why they're doing this.
There's definitely something menacing about it, right? Like
Yes.
technically they haven't really been anything but helpful, but you
Hmm.
can't help but feel like you are part of their game in some ways.
Yes.
And it's like there's a bit of discomfort. Like they talk directly to you. Nico's like, what are they talking about? Like, what does he mean? I guess you know. Like, it's just it is a strange, it's all sensation. Like I don't have any like specific thing that has happened to make me
Hmm.
feel so uncomfortable about this computer entity, but like it does make me feel that like discomfort.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it started from the very first moment where when you turn on the game and it says, like, for me, it said, like, hey, Kimchica. I was like,
Hmm.
I didn't
Yeah.
give you, like, it's that whole idea of if you've introduced yourself to someone, then it feels like you can have a conversation. But if you've never introduced yourself to someone and they just come up to you and start talking, um, and start telling you to do things, that's a very different vibe.
I don't want it.
So,
I don't like
yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah.
not comfortable. Um,
Yeah.
So we go through, we are in the Glen. I'm trying to think, I'm like looking through my notes really fast. We get actually a golden feather from the
Hmm.
siblings.
That's right.
And that ends up being useful to us because it's like a pen that we can use when we go through. And I think I think that's most of the big stuff that happens as we progress to the city.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. And you get this like there's like a giant robot in front of the door. And it's like,
Mhm.
basically you have to go past this robot to get through. And like literally the only thing you have to do is sign your name that you're coming in.
Yeah.
And it's like, what a hilarious commentary on like these kind of connect the dots based games that it's like, literally it's nothing. It's you have to write your name and just find something to write your name down with.
Yeah. Well, and actually, now that you mention it, it's kind of connecting the dots for me. It's see, the robots are sort of the extension of this bureaucracy that we see in the refuge, which I think is also interesting because it's our first
Mhm.
encounter with like, yeah, it's sort of the random rules that you get when you're in a company or in, quote unquote society where you're like, oh, to do this thing, you have to sign here. What does the signature do? Nothing really, but you got to do it. And
Yeah.
so we see a lot of that as we move into the refuge, which is our
Mhm.
third location. One thing I wanted to point out, I felt so smart. I feel like this is probably obvious to many people except for me. Um, when we are playing this game, the first color of the area we're in is blue. The second area is green, and the third is more of like a red. And I was like, RGB. It's red, green, blue.
Uh,
This is an RGB color scheme. And I was like, I'm not smart enough to
oh,
know if it goes deeper than that. Like, what does RGB mean? I don't know. But I felt really smart because I noticed that. And so I wanted to point it out.
I I know this is really interesting. I've been asked talking so my partner works in book publishing and so she has tried to explain to me the difference between RGB and CMYK and the different use cases. I cannot tell you how many times. Like I it's just as many times as she's tried to explain the difference between warm colors and cool colors to me, I just can't grok it. I can't get there. So I'll have to ask her about that because
Yeah.
I am fascinated now that you've connected those dots because you're 100% correct. Meanwhile, all of the like critical icons are like yellow, and when you're in Nico's memory, it's
Hmm.
yellow. And I'm interested. You've teased something here.
I know.
We'll have to
I'm
dig
like,
in. We'll have to dig in.
yeah, colors I think are fascinating. I don't know much about colors. I am not an artist in that way, but I know that colors are important. And so when I can see something and I notice it, I'm like, oh, I feel like there's something there. So also, if y'all are
Hmm, hmm.
smart and you've already figured it out, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Get in the comments for sure.
So as we enter the city, which is called the Refuge, this is the most well, it's maybe a little less bustling than perhaps it once was, but compared to the Barrens and compared to the
Hmm,
Glens, it is
hmm.
chock full of people and vendors and lots of things happening. You can explore apartments. You can go to a cafe, which I think is really cute and fun. And you meet a lamplighter character who is trying to get down to the surface of the refuge because this is all elevated, it's all up high. They're trying to get down, but the elevator isn't working. And so Nico's main big quest initially is to fix the button that works the elevator.
I'm gonna be honest. This is one of those moments for me where it was like, I have zero interest in fixing an elevator. It does nothing for me, and
Hmm.
I just followed the walkthrough guide like step by step, and I was just like, I picked up a few random things along the way so that I could like help out Maze and like check
Yeah.
out the cafe. But otherwise, I was like, I'm powering through this because it feels like a very liminal stage where it's like you're in
Hmm.
this elevator shaft. Um, and yeah, so for me, it was like I wanted to bust through the elevator shaft experience so that I could get to what I saw as being like more of the objective, which is like that
Yeah.
surface city experience.
Yes, there were like two really notable kind of conversations or things that happened here that I wanted to point out. The first is you have a conversation in one of the apartments with this. I think it's a girl who has a robot, and Nico asks once again about taming, and we don't get a solid answer either from her again, so we're still not entirely sure, but she says something about how it's a robot thing and she can't really explain how it works other than that. So it's something
Mm.
where now we know it's not taming isn't we've confirmed at least taming isn't anything that relates to a organically living being. It's something that only relates to robots and those with programming.
I'm going to put an asterisk next to that for when we
Mhm.
get to the end of the live to Dr. Silverpoint, because I think there's an asterisk there. I think there's a bit
Ah.
more to the story. I don't know what
Uh-huh.
it is,
Yeah.
but it just feels like there's something beneath the skin, if you will.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and knowing, like, kind of going with the idea of perhaps an unrelatable or unreliable narrator in this form, where it's like this is a citizen, so
Mm.
maybe they don't know everything about taming, so maybe we're not getting 100% accurate information too. So that's a good point. I also wanted to mention in one of the apartments you meet like a gardener, like a planter, and we get our first mention of the author, who I think is a really interesting character because this author is a really big deal, really passionate about his work, well traveled. And when we go down to the surface, we actually hear a lot more about the author. But this is the first time we ever get a mention of him, is with the plant, I believe.
I'm so glad you're talking about this because I read that and I was like, "Oh, am I the author? Is that another reference to me, but just like another title?"
Hmm.
I did not pick up on all the other references to the author throughout the game, so I'm super curious to see what you've picked up on there. Like,
Yeah.
what are some of your like theories? Like, what are you thinking about that?
Well, so we only loosely see the author sort of at that top level, only with the plant character.
Hmm.
But later, when you go into the library on the surface of the refuge, where most of the characters are kind of um, gathered because they are reading, but also I think they're like kind of huddling there for safety because supposedly the
Mm.
structure is more
Hmm.
secure against the glitching and the squares. You see all of these characters reading books by the author, and it seems like every book or nearly every book is by the author in the library. There's a character who's like, I was writing a book, but the author wrote something like it, so I can't write it anymore because the author already did it better. um,
Okay.
so, my guess and my hypothesis is the author was like, perhaps the game developers or like the creators of this
Oh,
particular world.
the
Um,
real gods.
yeah, perhaps. So this was like at this time, that's the hypothesis for me is it, the author is supposedly well traveled, has done all of these amazing things, knows everything. Um, and in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, the only person outside of maybe us who could do that is probably the person who made this world in the first place. And for us, that would be the game developers, perhaps.
That's
Um,
fascinating. I really like that because, like, in the context of this world, game developers are far more of a god than we are. Like, we have some degree of like free will and agency, and we can like move Nico around or whatever. But
right.
like, we can only do that within the confines of what the developers have created. So, yeah, there's some really interesting play here.
Yeah. I think the reason it's like a hypothesis and not like I'm pretty sure it's the game developers is because the author seems to be like the author has an office. So it's like the author seems to be in the game
Mm,
somehow. Like
sure.
the characters within it have met the author. So I'm like, is the author maybe a program that represents like an NPC that represents the developers? So there is still that like degree of removal. I'm not entirely sure.
Interesting.
We'll have to play more to find out, I think.
The Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own
Right?
tail.
Right? um
So the central conflict of this area, right, is that
Yes.
you're trying to get to the top level of the library,
Or of the
so that
tower?
you
Or, yeah, I guess of the library,
yeah,
yeah.
there's a staircase of the library, and like you have to go around and like do these mini quests in order
Mhm.
to get a library card, which you end up forging after you meet Doctor Silverpoint,
Yes.
who has a library card that she lets you borrow. And Doctor Silverpoint is like this engineer in this like big lab full of scientists,
Mhm.
looks just like the robot Silver,
Yes.
which is why I put the asterisk earlier
Mm.
around what does it mean to be tamed, because it's like, well, to my knowledge, we've only met one tamed robot, and that one tamed robot looks like a person, like a very real, like quote person in this
Mhm.
world. And so to me, it just made me wonder, like, well, maybe there is a connection to something organic here that's maybe a little, like to your point about unreliable narrator. Like, is there something actually connected here that we don't know about?
So, what I think is so as you explore the game, at least on the Switch, you can get little character bios essentially as you meet them and complete sort of their section of the game. The bio for Kip Silverpoint reads: the brilliant and highly respected head engineer of the refuge, Kip is responsible for many advances in robot technology that makes our lives easier every day. She's the creator of many robots that can be met throughout the world, most notably Silver, the Baron's head engineer, who is based on Kip's own image. Silver was intended to be the first of a new type of robot that could think and act like a person. Unfortunately, the difficulty of that task led to her going rogue during development. Though Silver was eventually stabilized, that day left a scar on their relationship that has yet to heal. Um, I think that asterisk you put about there being a human connection of some sort, whether it be physical, like you were modeled after the image of a human, or perhaps the time that Kip spent with Silver, because this was a robot made in her own image. I would imagine she would spend a lot of time with that robot. I think there is that connection there between
Interesting.
taming and the human element.
Is that so interesting? Is does it say literally like made in her image?
Yes, which I feel like is a phrase you see in biblical
It is.
somethings.
It's
Yeah.
like it is when like constantly we hear like the creation story or the creation myth of like Adam and Eve. It's like that God made Adam in his own image or something like that. That like that's a consistent, like a lot of Christians who are like, oh boy, this is gonna. They call themselves image bearers as a way to remind themselves
Oh,
that they are
wow.
like made in God's image. So
Yeah.
again, just like again, this like very hyper religious and like Christian specific language here is just
Hmm.
like
That's really
I'm just
interesting.
I cannot wait to finish this game because like I want to know
Yeah.
how much explicitly they're gonna give me to like settle in on some of this stuff versus like no, like we're gonna leave this one for you to just kind of like theorize.
Yeah, I'm really curious too because again, these are all points that I would not have connected to any theological level other than like, oh, maybe they used a word phrase because it's like from something that's sort of like everyone can resonate with, but I think you knowing
Mm,
some of these like meanings and connotations of phrases like this are really helping deepen my understanding. That's really interesting. Huh. So
fascinating.
we meet Silver. We go through one of the puzzles. I think is this right before? No, this is right before you meet Silver, or Silver Point, Doctor Silver
Mhm.
Point, where you have to unlock the lab. This is such a minor detail, but this is the puzzle that I was just like, I'm just gonna do this until I get it right. I'm just gonna guess it because I think it randomly resets every time. And that's the color puzzle where you're like, and I know there's a smart way to do this where the logic is like, oh, you only change like one and then or you only change like three and then yeah, process of elimination. You're supposed to figure out the five colored tablets next to the door and put them in the
Mhm.
right color order.
Mhm.
And the only confirmation you're given is how many you have correct. You don't know which one, but you need to get all five correct. And after 9 attempts, it will reset the puzzle. And not just reset the puzzle with the same answer, it changes the answer.
Oh, interesting.
This took me not an absurdly long time to get through, but more time than I felt like it needed to. I loved this puzzle though, but my goodness, I felt very silly.
Uh, this is also a classic D&D puzzle. So I've run into this
Oh my
guy
gosh, I need to play
any
more
number
D&D.
of times, and it is the resetting. It was a very interesting pressure test because I feel like that doesn't always
Mm.
happen, but like a lot of times, like you have one of these things right, you have two of these things right. Nope, now you back to one, and it's like, um, so I felt very comfortable with that. But when it said like you have this many guesses remaining, it like I was like, okay, I have to have my logic perfect with this
Oh my
or I am
gosh.
screwed. So I made it through on my first run, but it
Oh my
was like
gosh, you're so smart.
I think I just got lucky, honestly. Like I changed all of them to blue on the first run through, which was
Mhm.
a waste. I should not have done that, and I just got lucky that that didn't cost me. I didn't know what the
Wow.
puzzle was until I like tried that, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think the first time I went through it, I was just kind of clicking really quickly and I
Mm.
got through two, like I accidentally clicked send when it had like finished the dialogue and so it sent again. So I like gave myself one less chance because it just like I was just clicking through the dialogue so fast. I was so mad.
Oh,
I
oh
think it took me
no.
like 3 tries and it was just I felt very silly because I was like, I think this didn't need to take this long.
I know. I think that it is like an appropriate. It's like it's your at your challenge level, right? Like instead of your
Right.
frustration level. Like I think it's like a fun challenge
Yeah, it
puzzle
is.
for me at least.
Yeah, it was good, but I was just like, I was cruising, getting stuff done, and then this puzzle like stopped me in my tracks.
That does suck. I hate that feeling more than almost any other feeling in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, you meet Silver Point, you get your picture, you work through the okay, the hilarious bureaucracy of the library, by the way. I forget what the reception desk character is. I'm trying to remember
It's a
like
robot. I don't
a
remember what it's
robot.
called
Okay,
though.
it's not like cuz there's so many also like you mentioned it last time, but like the dream-like qualities of some of these characters where they're like
Hmm.
not quite human, but they're not robots. Some of these like they have odd objects for heads.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, I guess the receptionist is just a robot. Um I thought it was hilarious when it's like you're trying to get through, you ask all these questions. The robot clearly is addressing you, I think, as the Messiah. They know who
Hmm.
you are and what your purpose is. When it comes time for you to go upstairs and be like, "Hey, can I go do the thing and talk to the author?" The robot's like, "You need a card." And I found that so funny. It's just
It
like,
was
oh,
hilarious.
it's so good. Just the
And it's like, but you know
timing.
who I am? Yeah. And but can you give me a card? No, the person upstairs has to give you a card. Well, can you ask them for it? Well, they're not answering the phone. Can I go talk to them? No, you have to have a library card. Like that circular,
It's
like
so good. Oh, it made me so happy. But you eventually, yeah, you do get the card and you go up. But before that, I'm curious, did you explore the city extensively? Like, did you explore it or did you pretty much go straight to the library?
I only explored it enough to get the stuff I needed to help Maze
Hmm.
and to do the stuff to and to see the ram herder again. So that was about the extent of my like true exploration. And then I did my tummy did growl, so
Hmm.
I did go back to the diner and eat some pancakes, which unlocked a gut wrenching cutscene of like Nico's mom making pancakes for his birthday. He's like, on our birthdays, we get to have whatever we want.
Yeah,
And I got to have
hazelnut
pancakes. It's my
pancakes.
favorite. And these are really good, mister, but they're not as good as my mom's. They're the best pancakes. I was just like, oh my God.
I know. Oh my gosh. Um, so I'm curious then, did you get the sort of like I don't know what to call it, like the flash of like a memory or the flash of sort of a creature as you were exploring?
Yes.
Okay.
And like quick as a flash, like something comes on your screen and then goes off.
Yes.
And Nico's like, "Did you see that, Joel?" And I was like, "I saw it, buddy." He's like, "Okay, do you know what that was?" I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "I don't know
Yeah.
either."
Yeah. Did you happen to follow that and kind of like, did you discover the tree, I guess, and the fox?
No.
No. Okay.
What? You could
Okay.
follow it?
So there's like, well, I guess there's nothing to follow, but that alleyway where you get that like zoop, that flash,
Yeah.
um, I think it's like the last corridor or one of the last corridors in that alleyway space. If you walk up the corridor, there appears to be this like creature. I think it's like a fox that
Hmm.
runs behind a tree, and it's this lone beautiful like green tree in this alleyway that has dumpsters everywhere, and the only thing you get is a note from this sort of creature that says, if you can find a way to return, please do. And that's all it says. And then it's like there's
Oh,
nothing there anymore.
what?
So there's that.
What? Oh,
So that
no.
was the little cliffhanger that the game gave me right there.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
no. I'm bummed that I missed that. I'm bummed at the implications of that. I am wow, that's like this game is like one of those games that just like constantly gives you questions and
Yes.
I love it. I
Yes.
love it.
Me too. Um, as we get the library card, we move up into the publishing office, I guess technically, of the author. We meet, I think, one of the more interesting characters in that we also have one of the more extended conversations with this character, and that is George, the dice-headed
George the dice guy, the die
assistants.
guy.
Well, I think George is a lady. I think George uses she. Hold on, let
Ah,
me check.
I believe you. I meant like shy guy, die guy.
Oh, like
Was more
shy. Okay,
the vibe.
got it. But yeah, let me actually check because is it George? Am I remembering that correctly? Yes, George. Yes, George, the head librarian of the library in the refuge. She has 6 different personality. What? This is what the wiki is saying, and now I am like, what? George has 6 different personalities that the player can meet, possibly correlating to the 6 faces of a standard die. Okay,
What?
I am looking at my screenshots, and the front die face that I have is 3. I'm curious if you have a screenshot and
I
if
don't
you
have it,
know.
but I am almost 100% confident it was 4.
Wow. Okay. So on the wiki here,
Yeah, get it into it. Get into it.
3 is tired, mostly worried, and hopeless, seems to have low self esteem, which that's definitely what she seemed like. 4, the personality is cheerful and optimistic demeanor, very encouraging and excitable.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Some of the other personality types, I won't say the numbers in case someone's like
Mhm.
excited and wants to maybe like get surprised, but some of the other personality types include egocentric and cooperative, stressed out and rude, motherly and kind, and very casual and chill. So you can get different personality. Now I'm
That's
like, I want to replay this to get into that conversation a bit more.
um I cannot believe like this game just contains multitudes.
Just
Like it's like it
details.
seems like it should be such a straightforward game and it's just like, "Oh no, like here's a little like not that." I don't know. It's just it's incredible.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so good. Um, I love this conversation, and this is sort of the culminating conversation of this section before we go to sleep and take a nap, and kind of end this section of the game. But in this, we learn that George is an assistant to the author. She appears to like she believes in sort of this multiverse, and she talks about the multiverse, and she, at least in my playthrough, was super stressed because she was just constantly editing manuscripts from the author but never seeming to get anywhere. I think that's what she was like for me.
Oh, that's funny. I think it was more like optimism that like Nico's quest was going to be successful and really help. I think that was more the vibe that she had for me.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Um, I'm so fascinated. And actually, there is a link. If you go to the wiki, they have a handy link where it's like if you just want to see all the different dialogue options, they're there. So you don't have to replay the
Oh,
whole thing. If you want to just read
interesting.
through the different options
Mhm.
um, that are possible, that's so cool. Um,
Wow.
Gosh, what a fun detail to have into the game. Um, in the library, you can read a variety of books. And so I did all of that before I put Nico to bed.
You
Um,
did it.
I did. So the first book talks about George and believing the multiverse theory, which again, I think alludes, oh my gosh, I'm looking at it right now. It even explicitly asks you, it says there are 6 multiverses. Which one did you encounter? They asked that in the game, and I did not connect the dots. Oh, they tell you.
That means that it is not George that changes. It is the world in which we meet George that changes.
Yes.
I gotta wonder what else is different between our playthroughs now.
I
Like, are
know.
we actually having like micro adjustment different playthroughs because you're playing in like multiverse 3 and I'm playing in multiverse 4?
Yeah. I mean, like from a developer standpoint, I can't imagine they're that, you know what I mean? I can't imagine, but also you never know. And
I
it
mean,
goes to say like there's an element again because this game is so fourth wall breaking.
mhm,
Your interaction with the world inherently is going to be different, right? Than mine, than another
sure.
players. And so it's like in that sense, it's like a multiverse there because we each have the game downloaded into our own system. Like the game inherently is multiversed. I don't know.
I mean, if you had asked me about this, like, is it possible that we're having like microcosm differences within our gameplay? I'm like, that seems like an awful lot to expect from a game. And then we played Cosmic Will Sisterhood last summer, and it was
That's true.
like I can't even fathom how many different like logic tree experiences the developers made for
Oh my gosh, I don't want to think about it. That's so much.
that.
The other book I read in the library here talked about the Profit Bot and how they used basically the Profit Bot that we saw was a second edition. There was a prototype prior to that profit bot. So the profit bot that we met was actually not the first because the book starts with, thankfully, Dr. Silverpoint's team was able to replicate our prototype. On the right is an updated sketch of some of the modifications of the external design. So that's where we see the sketch of profit bot as we know it. So
Hmm.
we know that there has been a profit bot before of some sort. Um, and they also reinforced that taming Prophet Bot was a lost cause. Um, the next book I read had a watercolor, and this is again the interesting part because the book or books that you read are not pixelated. They are smooth digital pieces of art. Like I don't know how to explain it. It's like they're not pixelated. They don't look of the same world in a way.
Yeah.
Um, the third
Hmm.
book I read had a black clover in it, which is a plant that we have seen throughout the entire world, and it's tinged with, I guess, 3-leafed clover. The
Hmm.
first leaf is tinged blue, the second leaf is tinged green, and the third leaf is tinged red.
Oh, incredible.
Quick pause moment. Um, no, she didn't take her pill. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Fine.
149.58. Okay. So yeah. So that's where I really put the good dots together because I saw the like literal RGB on the screen in front of me in one place. And that's where I made the connection to
Wow.
the environment. Um And it talks about how the pigmentation of the clovers are primarily black, but the leaves display incredible iridescence when exposed to sunlight. They show the colors when exposed to sunlight, which is what you're trying to restore. Um, it talks about the resiliency of the plants and that they may be the first life forms to colonize the world.
Wow. This game, man.
So
I
good.
can't even. Wow.
Um, the other book has more like kind of a lore about like taming silver, I think. And then this is the one I thought was really interesting because we have like prophet and messiah brought up again. So I'll
Mhm.
read it out
Mhm.
loud for you.
Mhm.
Um, Another fruitful visit to the great prophet today. She seemed high in spirits, and she told me that she saw another glimpse of the Messiah's arrival more vivid than before. The Messiah will wake up in a dark house. And she said the vision included lights from a window and the sound of footsteps on a wood floor. Regrettably, she's unsure of that house's location. Rachis was also present at the meeting, and I ended up visiting his house later and we swapped notes. He has been very vigilant on recording the prophet's day to day musings, and his writing has been significantly more legible lately. His children, were endearing as ever. The older child, Calamus, has expressed an interest in reading, and I offered to teach him as I did his father. So the author knew Calamus's father and Calamus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
And
when you as you're rereading that the prophet part,
yep,
was it calling the prophet bot a she and then later calling it a he?
maybe no. So I think the he was referring to Ratchus, who is Calamus's
Okay.
father. I'm looking at this
Okay.
right now, and I guess the prophet bot was maybe a she, if that's what the great prophet is. I don't know if
This
the
is
great
I'm
prophet is the
wondering.
same as prophet bot though.
It can't be.
Yeah,
It can't be. Because Prophet Bot did one thing. He had
you're
one
right.
message to share. That was like the whole thing that we learned about was through Prophet Bot. They have like one thing. And so the fact that this person has multiple prophecies means that that cannot be Prophet Bot.
Yes. So we don't know who the great prophet is. I don't think. I don't know if we know. I don't know who the great prophet is. So you just we know now there is a great prophet. Um, Also, I think it's notable that the author again. This is the writing of the author, and so if the author was the game dev directly, the author would know all of this
Mm,
stuff. But now
hmm.
I'm wondering again, I mentioned this earlier, but this reinforces that maybe kind of like Dr. Silverpoint made Silver. It's like, did the game devs make the author?
Interesting.
Like, is that the parallel that we
Like their
see
self
there?
insert.
Yeah.
God, there's so much to dig in with this game. I am just like I'm loving it. I'm so glad you found this one for us.
It's so good. So yeah, after all of that reading and meeting George, where we stopped, at least in terms of our Geeks and Grounds playthrough, is taking a nap, going
Take a
to
little
sleep.
nap.
Yep.
Hmm.
Um, Next week we will be going to the tower, and beyond is what I'll say. Going to the tower and beyond. Um, and what we're going to be reflecting this week in the newsletter and reflections. And what I'd love to pose to you, Joel, it's a very broad question, but I think it's going to be one that's interesting to reflect on, especially
I want me to
considering
write it down in
how,
my game journal.
ah, uh,
Hmm.
considering how you are consuming this game. Um, I'm wondering if you would consider yourself an optimist or a pessimist.
I will have to think on that. I don't know. Um, I I think when I started, I was probably more optimistic, and I think the more I'm playing, I'm becoming more pessimistic.
Yeah, yeah.
I just feel like they're setting me up to be not happy.
Okay.
So we'll see. I'll reflect on that as I'm playing through this next section to see like how I'm feeling. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I'm becoming less optimistic the more I play. Certainly.
Ooh. Oh, dang. All right. Well, we'll definitely think on that. I think um for myself,
Hmm.
while I can joke quite cynically, sometimes I feel at my core, I feel I am an optimist. Um I think just because it's on top of mind because I've just played it, but I think like multiple playthroughs of Undertale for me have kind of shown me that
Hmm.
I'm like
Hmm.
when faced with anything and any choice, I'm going to try to do like what I feel is the thing that will be brighter. And
Fair.
so
Yeah.
um I think I generally hold that view. But yeah, playing this game, I think it's going to be really interesting to reflect on just if you feel like you're generally an optimist, generally a pessimist. Maybe in this game, are you more of one than another that's different
Yeah.
in your other daily life
Yeah.
experiences? So
Hmm.
yeah.
I love that. Uh, well, anything else for our session today?
I don't think so. I
For
think the
book club
last
today?
update again, yeah, just make sure if you're following along, play. I think I'll read it out because I don't want to say it incorrectly. This is in the playthrough guide. So if you're also like, wait, where do I see this? In the newsletter, you can click on the playthrough guide. I actually updated the Geeks and Ground website, so the playthrough guide is on there too. Very
E.
helpful. But we are going to be playing until, again, only if you want to follow along exactly with us. Playing until dark mode is making this hard to read. Let me turn on light mode. Um, play until. Oh, you will not get a prompt to sleep, but there is a convenient sleep spot when you reach the Glen again after the mines.
I'm gonna re Glen again, huh?
You're gonna read Glen again. Perhaps. You might not, actually.
Oh
There
no!
is there is a potential. Yeah, there's
Didn't
actually a
happen.
strong potential for folks who play and they find a certain. Oh, it's so hard. This is so cryptic, but there's a potential that some people may not get to the Glen again, depending on their personal feelings of the game and what they decide is an appropriate
Oh no!
next step. I will be able to
Maybe
speak more
depending
on
on which
that next week.
multiverse you find yourself in.
Yeah. But if you are continuing through and you push through, um, go to sleep or finish, your play session right after the mines once you get back to the Glen.
Ugh, love it. Ugh, well, thank you so much for joining us at Geeks and Grounds this week. It was a pleasure having you here again. Like, get into the Discord, get into the newsletter. Great way to connect with us and tell us about your experience playing OneShot. This has been a truly fabulous game to start the year off with. So, thank you as always, Jenny, for the selection. Uh, since we're on a religious kick, may the gods bless your brew over the coming week. Uh, Thank you so much. See ya. Bye.
Bye. The Geeks and Grounds podcast is produced and edited by me, Jenny Wyndham. The logo is designed by Lee Thomas, and the intro-outro track is Children of the Ruins from the OneShot OST. Rate and review us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Find us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Geeks and Grounds. Visit geeksandgrounds.com for direct links to our Discord community and newsletter sign up, and email questions, comments, thoughts, or feedback to jenny@geeksandgrounds.com. Thanks again for listening.